Okay, this video is going to take a look at the following notes, discuss the following terms, and that would be the scope of a variable and what are local variables of a method. We're going to take a look at those two things, and they're especially important to know and understand when dealing with methods. Now, what you should have in front of you is this trace code review activity that we did on week 18, day 1, and so you should have that out, and because we're going to discuss local variables and variable scope from that. So the very first thing is the scope of a variable. Now when you think of scope, you think of a telescope. So a telescope helps you see things far away. A microscope helps you see small things. So scope has to do with seeing. And so the scope of a variable is the part of a program in which the compiler can access or see the variable. So when a variable is declared, it can't be seen by all parts of a program. In fact, its scope, or the part of the program that can actually see or access that variable, starts with its declaration and goes to the end of the block of code that it's in. Many times that's going to be a method, the body of a method. It could be the body of a clause. It could be like an if clause or an else clause. It could be within the loop body, and so it's just whatever is within the block of code. It goes from the declaration to the end of that block of code. And so as we look at that on the code, here's what happens. So if we're talking about the scope of the variable total sal, okay, this variable is declared on line 19. So its scope goes from line 19 to the end of the block of code, or to the block of code. So really, actually, we could just go ahead and say this. So here we go. So this is the scope of the variable total sal. So this variable can be called and it can be updated, and everything from the declaration on all the way down to here. So that is why the total sal, that's why we cannot, here we take the total salaries and divide them by the number of employees. Well, why don't we just go and get the total salaries from this variable? Well, it's because up here is out of scope of that variable. In other words, this area here, everything above here and everything below here, does not have access to that variable. So it cannot see that variable that's been declared within this block of code. And so that's why what we have, this is just kind of helps to reinforce the reason why we put this total salary, we put that amount as an argument of a method call, and then we pass it to the parameter variable of the method header, so that that amount can be used, because a variable call is not going to work, but a method call can pass it, so it can be used in that method. Alright, so that is scope. And one more thing regarding scope, a special type of variable is parameter variables. So these parameter variables here, they are declared in the method header. Alright, so this is a declaration. So therefore these particular variables, their scope is all the way from the method header to the last line of that block of code. So this would be the scope of emp and the scope of sal. Starting from right here for sal. But anyways, that's the idea. So that's scope, the scope of a variable. Now let's take a look at the other thing we had in here, and that was what are local variables. So local variables of a method are the variables that are declared within the body of the method. They're the variables that are declared within the body of the method. So let's say that we have the method it's not working. The method average salary. Okay, what did I do wrong here? Here we go. We have the method called avSalary. Alright, so we're looking at what are local variables. Well, what are the variables that have been declared within the body of that method? Well, declared means you're looking for a data type and a variable. And so you have one variable that's been declared within the body. You might say, well, what about sal? What about emp? Nope. They were declared outside of the body. They were declared before the body. The method header is before the body. It's not part of the body of the method. Okay, so let's take a look at the main method. Well, what are the local variables of the main method? Well, everything has been declared between the opening and closing braces of the main method. So you're looking for a data type and variable. That's 1. Data type and variable. That's 2. And data type and variable. That's 3. So those 3 variables are local to the main method. Alright, so now emp, as we said, and sal are not local variables, but they are called parameter variables. So you have parameter variables and you have local variables. And by the way, to go back to the scope of a variable, when we said, well, we cannot we can't call from here the total salary, total sal, because it's in a different method or it's not within the scope. Okay, the idea here is we would say sal is out of scope. That's what that means. So emp is out of scope of the num of emp variable. And that's why we had to pass both of them up through the method call. In the same way, we have a return. We have return salary per emp. Well, that avSalary per emp is the same thing basically, but we can't call this variable because right here is out of scope, the scope of this variable, which was declared right here. Alright, so that's how scope of a variable works and how local variables work.